and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen, and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us. Well, we are on our final chapter of Definitions for Living, Chapter 23, Understanding Selfishness. And you start out, the very first sentence is you say, the topic of selfishness is confusing to many people. They have been taught or have picked up from their culture different and often vague ideas about what it means to be selfish. Explain this a little bit, because selfish seems like a pretty straightforward word. Why is it so confusing?
Well, it's confusing because what we have been taught, either directly or indirectly, just by living in a pretty mixed up world where so many things that appear to be right are really wrong, and so many things that appear to be wrong are really right, and so we get a lot of confusion in that. This is often like the old sayings of, crazy making behavior is when someone says the sky is blue and you say, no, it's green. That's crazy making. It's trying to discount other people's perceptions and realities and tell them that something's wrong with them, to the point where people don't trust their own intuitions and reality. And so living in this crazy world of a lot of true ignorance and malevolent intentions, a lot of people come to believe that black is white and white is black, and up is down and down is up, and right is wrong and wrong is right. So everything gets backwards in people's thinking because that's one of the favorite ways of manipulating other people to get what you want, is to tell them that they're the problem and not you, and put a guilt trip on them so that you get what you want. So selfishness fits within that whole concept of manipulation that is so prevalent and always has been in our world today. It's the old pointed finger principle, is that when I point the finger at you, I'm blaming you for what's really true about me, because the old adage of, when you point a finger at someone else, then you have three fingers pointing back at yourself, and your thumb is covering up those three fingers so that nobody sees or pays any attention to the fingers that are pointing back at you. So the metaphor of the pointed finger, which we call projection in psychological terms, is a crazy-making, guilt-tripping type behavior, and that's what most labels of selfishness are all about. And if we don't know that, if we don't know how to counter that in our own thinking and realize what's going on, then we feel really, really guilty about stuff for which we have no real good reason to feel guilty. Or we do things that really are selfish, but we don't feel selfish. We call the other person selfish. And so here again, everything gets reversed. And that's why it's very confusing. And so this is what I'm trying to do in this chapter, is to clarify what selfishness is and what it is not.
Well, with that said, let me read these you have a list of common misconceptions that people learn about selfishness. And so I'd like to just read them. I think most people will recognize them. You are selfish if you do what pleases you. You are selfish if what you do hurts someone else's feelings. You are selfish when you think of or put yourself first. You are selfish if you love yourself. You are selfish if you want someone to do something for you. You are selfish if you get angry or disappointed with anyone. You are selfish if you grieve over a loss. You are selfish if you gain something at the expense of someone else. You are selfish if you keep something you could give to someone else. You are selfish if you want more than you have. Whew, I bet the listeners out there, I know I certainly do, recognize many, if not all of these, because what I'm reading are not the definitions of selfishness. They are the common misconceptions, just to reiterate that.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard every one of these over the years of my practice, and I could take each one of them and give examples of it, but it's somewhat self-evident that the common theme through each one of these, if you do anything for yourself, you're being selfish.
Yeah, and that's a tough one. That way people could really almost grab onto anything you do. And if it doesn't please them, then you're being selfish. Am I correct?
Yes. Because by nature, everything that we do is in some form self-serving. Even when we do something sacrificially, and it seems to be totally of no benefit to us, that is not accurate, because even if we sacrificially give to someone else, we are being true to a concept of ourselves that we hold dear and close, some form of integrity or self-value. Like if we give something to someone else or do something for someone else sacrificially, even if it is a great disadvantage to ourselves, someone saying, well, you're being totally unselfish because you're getting nothing out of it for yourself, but that's not true, because we get a sense of self-satisfaction, a sense of self-worth and pride, that we're being true to ourselves as a caring, giving person. So that in itself is self-serving, even though it seems not to be to the people who observe. So everything we do is self-serving. Like we eat, we sleep, we go to the doctor, we go to the dentist, we drive safely on the highway so we don't get hurt. Everything we do is self-serving. And so therefore, if this definition of selfishness were accurate, then everything we do would be selfish. And by definition, the word selfish has the connotation of being bad or wrong.
Mm-hmm. So even in altruism, it really is reciprocity. You might not get back something from that person or that animal, but you do. You might not get something tangible back, but you get a sense of well-being and something that warms you and gives back to you in that way.
Absolutely, yes. So it serves us as well, or we wouldn't do it.
Everything.
Right.
Unless, and you talk about this a little bit further down, and unless your motive is not good.
Yes, and we'll get to that in a minute for sure.
Yeah. So, if we do believe these ideas as selfishness, we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble and also do a lot of harm by labeling others and by labeling ourselves.
Yes, it's extremely damaging to, like you said, ourselves and others. And all of our relationships, if we don't get this concept of selfishness clear in our mind. That's why, even though this is the last chapter in the book, just because it happens to be alphabetically the last, which is how I arranged the chapters for easy reference, I also consider this one of the more crucial, important chapters because so much of our lives are based on understanding or misunderstanding this concept of selfishness. It permeates every aspect of our lives. So that's why this is such an important chapter. So it's, as the old saying goes, last but not least.
Right. You say to avoid a life filled with guilt and anger, you will need to reinterpret the meaning of selfishness. So can you help us know how to do that? How do we interpret the meaning of selfishness to be useful for us, to be more meaningful?
Yes, and that's the crux of this chapter, is the answer to that question. And in the latter part of that short paragraph that you just quoted, the answer I have put in bold letters. I'm not suggesting that you discard the idea that some behaviors truly are selfish, because they really are, and we'll discuss those in a moment. But I say I am suggesting, however, that you refocus your emphasis away from self-gratification per se as the measurement of selfishness and toward the motive behind the behavior.
And you refocus your emphasis away from the self-gratification because, like you said, everything we do is self-serving.
In some way or another, that's true.
So we've got to take the focus away from that.
Yes, and put it on what our intentions are, what we're trying to accomplish. And also the overall pattern of our lives, our overall general attitude toward life, which I discuss in the following paragraphs. If indeed we do have this attitude of being a taker rather than a giver, and we are consistently and predominantly focused on what's in it for me, and I'm not going to give away anything I don't have to, and everything I do is designed to meet my desires and my wishes and my goals, then we are indeed being selfish with a general attitude of misusing other people and the resources that we have on a daily basis to satisfy our own desires. And I say desires rather than the word needs, because it's important that we meet our basic needs of well-being. But most people go way beyond that, and all they're interested in is I want what I want when I want it, and what is yours is mine and I'll take it, and what is mine and I'll keep it. Well, that's the definition of selfishness. So if we have that general attitude toward life, then you can bet your bottom dollar you're being a selfish person. Mm-hmm. But all of us are selfish from time to time. But it's whether it's to the degree to which we practice selfishness. But we also need to be balanced in our lives as givers as well as takers, so that we care about the needs of others as well as our own needs.
How can we know if it boils down to one's intention? How can we know if another person is being selfish or not? Because we can't really know another person's intention, can we?
No, we can't know their intention because sometimes people are selfish ignorantly, mm-hmm. and so they don't really intend to be selfish, but their behavior itself does qualify as selfish if we indeed know that it is harmful to someone or to the environment. And so so someone's intentions, as far as we know, may not be clear in their mind that they're being selfish. Let me give you an example. It's not quite so true today as it was in previous years, but it's true in a much larger degree of being destructive to the planet. Mm-hmm. Many years ago, I remember that it was not at all uncommon to see people going down the highway, rolling down their window and throwing out their coffee cups or their trash by the side of the road, and the roads were just filthy and filled with debris and trash. And so a lot of people did not intend to harm the environment and to make it unattractive and unpleasant for other people because of their ignorance, or it was just a lifestyle. So we'd say those people are deliberately being selfish. No, but their behaviors are selfish, mm-hmm. even without the intent. So we look at the consequences of someone's behavior to determine whether they're selfish. And that's pretty straightforward in my opinion, is that it's one thing for someone to say, I can't pick you up at the airport, by the way, as an example. And we might say, well, you're being really selfish because you really could, but you just don't want to. All you care about is yourself. Well, that may or may not be true. But it's another thing for someone to call you a bad name, mm-hmm. to shame you, to hit you, to steal from you, to destroy your reputation, to abuse you in some obvious way, either emotionally, physically, to lie to you in ways that are harmful to you. So it's pretty straightforward for most of us to experience actually being harmed by someone else, which is truly selfish, versus they didn't do what I wanted them to do, and so they're being selfish. Mm-hmm. So the consequences of one's behavior are pretty clear across the board, and that's why we have so many laws to protect society, because we know what harmful behavior is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If it's somebody that you know, then you talk about don't assume. And I guess people you don't know too. I mean, you're looking at the consequences, but we don't always know the story. We don't always know what their intentions are. We don't always know where they're coming from. And what may be selfish to us may not be to another person. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that totally. And the way to handle that is when someone has done something that you believe is truly harmful to you, like when they misrepresent you to someone else.
Yes.
And that hurts a relationship. And someone could say, well, I certainly had no intention to be hurtful to you. I was just sharing something that I thought was true, and it was not deliberately to hurt your relationship with that person. So you don't really have the right to come back and say, no, you're lying, you did that intentionally, because that may or may not be true. But you can respond by saying, well, I hear what you're saying, and whether you did it intentionally or not, please don't do it again.
Right.
So you can ask them to change their behavior and learn from that experience, is that if you are going to tell someone something about me, do not base it on what you assume to be true. Ask me first. So that's solving the problem. It's not getting into a conflict with them about what their intentions were. It says, your intentions are your business, only you know what your intentions were, but I'm asking you to not do that anymore. Right. So that's a good way to handle that without getting into a power struggle of accusing them of something you cannot prove.
And if you stay away from labeling them like, you are one of the most selfish people I've ever met, all that, then it goes back to, we've talked earlier in earlier chapters about labeling, and it really is not a good way to communicate. Just be clear, set your needs, and there again, by stating your needs firmly or kindly or whatever, however you want to do it, that's not being selfish. That's asking for what you need.
Yes, and that's very important. Is that, and we get to that, and when we talk about what selfishness is not, but it's important that that we speak up for ourselves when someone is doing something that either displeases us or harms us. Then we have the right to speak up,
even if the intention was not there.
That's exactly right.
Right.
But you just don't get into a power struggle about their intentions. But what I want to emphasize here is that we can know what our intentions are personally to evaluate whether we are being selfish or not. We can't do it for other people. That's their responsibility. But when we're talking about, am I being selfish, then you say, well, I can't judge that on what is benefiting me alone. I also have to determine the answer to that question by what are my intentions. Are my intentions to satisfy me only, all the time? And are my intentions to deliberately deprive someone of their safety and their well-being and their happiness, and am I doing it for that purpose? And just totally disregarding how it's going to affect other people, then that's being selfish as well.
Yeah, so that our intentions and the evaluation of our intentions are really the only things we have control over.
Yes. So we don't worry too much about other people's intentions. That's their business. But we do have the right to ask them to change their behavior if we wish to. And that's not particularly an issue of selfishness. That's an issue of asking for what you want and then being willing to take no for an answer. If you get no for an answer, we talked about that in the earlier chapters.
That's very good. Well, let's talk about some of the following. You say the following guidelines comprise what I believe is a more accurate concept of selfishness. And what if I read one and then you read one? And anytime you want to interject or fill in, please.
You bet.
Okay. You are being selfish when your basic approach to life is one of self-gratification only.
And the key word there is only or primarily.
If you find yourself constantly asking, what's in it for me, or feel the world owes you, it is likely many of your decisions and actions will indeed be selfish. That's pretty straightforward.
It is. And number 2, when you do something without considering others who may actually be harmed by what you do. If you're just inconsiderate, you don't even think about it, then that's potentially being selfish because it could be harmful to someone. Not just displeasing, but harmful. And so if your attitude is just to be oblivious to other people, to the effect of your behavior has on other people, then you're likely to be selfish more often than not.
That's interesting because I have met people who are very, very nice, very kind, but will make rash decisions and just do it without consulting another person or saying, hey, I want to let you know I'm doing this. It might affect you. Just going and doing it regardless. And I get confused by that sometimes because I have been nonplussed at times or taken aback because I think, but I really care about this person, or that person's nice. I don't understand. So that person can be doing selfish behaviors, maybe out of ignorance, but when you're not thinking about the people around you and the ramifications your actions may take, that is a form of selfishness.
Yes, it is. And a daily example, Tony, could be as simple as you're having a conversation with someone and they make a statement. And you may come up with, well, that's stupid. Why would anybody think that? Where'd you come up with an idea like that? That makes no sense whatsoever. Well, there's a softer, kinder way of saying that, such as, well, I can see how you might think that. I have a different perspective on that. From my way of looking at it, it's more like this. So you don't have to put someone down and label them and shame them of calling them stupid or that's just being unreasonable, because that does have an effect on how people feel. And so that's being selfish if you do not think ahead for a second of how your words and your facial expressions and your tone of voice may affect someone else and hurt the conversation. It cause them to shut down and feel bad about themselves or angry at you when you don't need to do that. So we can be kind in correcting someone else or disagreeing with them. And it's selfish not to have that attitude of kindness and consideration of how our words affect other people.
And our behaviors.
And our behaviors.
Okay, number 3. You're being selfish when you do something to deliberately harm someone out of revenge. This guideline is similar to the one above, except for its emphasis on the conscious intent to hurt someone else. Selfishness here would be obvious.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Yes.
Oh, let me go back to number 2 real quickly.
Sure.
Because there's an important part here. In number 2, I say, without considering who may be actually harmed by what we do. And a lot of people will misuse the word hurt. They say, you really hurt me, you hurt my feelings, which is a strange phrase anyway. How can a feeling be hurt? Generally, it's basically, you displeased me, or you said something that I felt offended by, So a lot of people will use the word hurt, which would be synonymous with harmed. You harmed me in some way, you hurt me in some way, when actually you're not harming them at all if you disagree with them or if you don't do what pleases them. But they will use the word hurt simply because sometimes they don't know any better. It's just ignorance. But sometimes it's intentional to make someone feel guilty for hurting me when actually you're saying you displeased me and I'm angry with you. So it's important that we not get caught up with feeling guilty just because someone had their feelings hurt. They're not being harmed at all. They're not being hurt. They're just ticked off at you because you didn't do what pleased them.
Or they feel, I don't know if this word it may be too vague, but they're having bad feelings. They may not know what those bad feelings are. They might be sad or embarrassed or
disappointed,
shamed or disappointed, and they don't have the vocabulary to say it, but they feel something inside, and it's just an automatic nature in many of us humans to say, well, I feel bad, they said something, so it must be them that made that happen.
Right. And so that's why, it's exactly right. So that's why we don't want to use other people's evaluation of what we have said or done automatically to determine whether we've done something wrong or not. We may or may not have. That's why we have to evaluate our own intentions honestly and sometimes painfully about whether we are being selfish or not. But just because someone else gets their feelings hurt does not necessarily mean that we've done anything wrong or hurtful to them.
And what you said in past chapters is be careful not to apologize too quickly.
Yes, that's a good point to bring up. Is that they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry I hurt your feelings." No, you can say, "Well, let's take a look at that. Can we talk about that and sort of reconstruct our conversation? Let me ask you, what was going on?" So your point is well made, is that don't apologize too quickly, but then when you do determine that, I messed up, then that's when the apology is appropriate.
Right. And you want to read 4?
When you choose not to express your feelings and needs, when doing so could help heal or nurture a relationship that's important to you. And I'll just read the entire statement. You may believe that sharing your emotions and needs is selfish because it creates conflict or places a burden on someone else. You feel guilty for, quote, making trouble for someone else. But if you cannot be honest and open enough to express your needs, trouble already exists. To let a relationship fall apart just so you will not feel guilty is truly selfish. So a lot of people just say, well, I'll just keep my feelings to myself. And I've been, quote, guilty of this many, many times. And have realized it after the fact that I was doing this very thing. And that is, well, I just won't tell this person that how I feel about them or a situation or something they've done, because it's just going to cause a problem. So therefore, I'll just keep my mouth shut. And then it continues the behavior continues on the other person's part, or we tend to harbor resentment, or there's a wall that's built up between me and someone else because I was not gentle and honest enough to tell them what's I'm feeling bad about, and it hurts the relationship, and it could help heal the relationship or get us back on the right track by being honest in a kind way and confronting the person without creating a conflict. And that's selfish not to do that when it could help the relationship.
It also takes some courage, and it takes some vulnerability. And I think that's what this whole book is about, really. Being willing to step into that place.
Yes. And learning the difference between confrontation and conflict, which is covered in an earlier chapter, as you said, is very, very important. It's important to confront, but do it in a kind, compassionate, loving way, so as not to create a needless conflict. Confrontation is when you address a problem that needs to be solved. Conflict is when you attack a person.
I really encourage all listeners to go back and listen to that particular chapter. I think we need it very much in today's world. Number 5, when you choose not to care for your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs, you are being selfish. Wow. Not caring for your own needs is selfish because it causes you to live in a deficient state, both physically and emotionally. You cannot give sincere or lasting attention to the needs of others unless you give proper attention to your own. Remember, we really do tend to treat others the way we treat ourselves. And I'm very moved by this particular one because one of the most important things I know you told me several years ago is when you are not taking care of yourself, when you're not moving forward, when you're not doing what you need to do, then you are being selfish. And I couldn't understand that. And then you quickly said, I've seen you when you do give of yourself. I've seen you when you do take care of yourself and you do what you need to do for yourself. And that is better for all of us because you are being a more warm, open-hearted person, and that's better for everybody.
Exactly. I want to very quickly tell a story for our listeners that I used to tell my clients a lot, which is a true story. When I was a little child, I went to a Protestant church, and I remember sitting on these little hard benches in this little Sunday school room, and the teacher put up on the board one day, she said, now, boys and girls, this is the secret of joy. And she wrote J-O-Y on the board. And she said, now, what that means, boys and girls, is that you put Jesus first, others second, and yourself last. J-O-Y. Jesus, others, and yourself. That's the secret of joy. And I didn't know any better, as a kid to believe that. So it's the idea is that you always put yourself last.
That seems to be the way of our American our American culture.
Yes. Unless you look at the other half of it or the other percentage of it, sometimes it's put yourself first and others always last. So,
Yes.
so there's that too.
There is.
But you're exactly right. That whole idea of joy, and I did not know that was not true. And then I went back and studied a New Testament passage that someone came to Jesus and said, good master, what is the great commandment? And he said, love God. And then he said, love your neighbor. And the second is likened to it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. See, that's been misinterpreted. So we have to love ourselves first and use our self-love as a model for loving others. We really do treat other people the way we treat ourselves. And so the true definition of joy is J-Y-O, not J-O-Y. So self-love is the path to other love.
Wow, it's very powerful and it's very true. There's no question in my mind. I like this next. After you list all this, you say, to know whether you're being selfish or unselfish, you should begin to place more attention on why you do something and less on the fact that it happens to be beneficial to you. That word why is everything. And it seems like it could be a question that we ask ourselves, just that word, before we say something, before we do something. Why am I saying this? Why am I doing this? And again, this harkens back to some of the earlier chapters as well in communication.
What are my motives?
Yeah, exactly. Would you like to kind of sum the rest of this up for us, and just tell us some things that we really need? I mean, we've already gotten the biggest kernels. Just sum this up for us, if you would.
I'll go back to the beginning. We have to be intentional and deliberate and thoughtful about living healthily and happily and lovingly toward ourselves and others. It's not automatic. If we just put our brains in neutral and on autopilot, we always get ourselves in trouble, because the world has never done, nor ever will do, in my opinion, a good job of teaching us how to live effectively. So we have to take over our brains rather than let culture take over our brains, and consider our motives and our intentions. Hopefully, like you said, before we say or do anything, or at least as we're saying it or doing it, or even after we say it or do it, but somewhere along the line, be accountable to yourself as well as holding other people accountable as to what am I trying to accomplish here? What are my intentions? Are they caring and loving, or indeed are they selfish and harmful to other people or to ourselves? And so the idea is to not be lazy in our thinking and judge ourselves or others by what our culture has passed down to us, because it has never done a good job of teaching us how to live well. So it's basically take control of your brain and use these guidelines to determine your behavior toward yourself and others. And I want to close with this last chapter, last paragraph. Some of these new guidelines will probably contradict what you've been led to believe about selfishness, which is what I just emphasized. Don't assume that what you were taught is good information, because most of the time it is not. You'll need to be patient with yourself as you adjust to and become comfortable with them. You may come to realize that what you once thought were self-sacrificing and caring actions were really quite selfish. On the other hand, you may discover that some of your attitudes and behaviors you had thought were unacceptable and selfish are actually loving and unselfish. Here again, we've been taught a lot of stuff that's backwards. You will slowly come to realize that taking good care of yourself without guilt or apology, you will be able to truly care about and meet the needs of others as well.
I'd like to add one more thing. It's on how to be with others' desires and needs and wants. And just because we may not be satisfied with what they are saying or doing does not mean, and we kind of alluded to this, it doesn't mean that they're being selfish. And sometimes we just have to strike that balance, because we're not going to get everything we need or want.
Absolutely. Point well made.
It is a compromise. And so just because we're not happy with what somebody else does or says, pointing the finger may not be the right reaction or response to that. We have to make sure that we are looking after our own needs and being okay that that person is also looking after their own needs.
Absolutely. And one thing we alluded to all the way through here, the issue of projection and all that, there's the old saying of the pot calling the kettle black. And I think that's the crux of this chapter, and you've just summarized it. Projection is the key word to understand here, is that most of the time, much of the time, not all the time, but much of the time, when we or someone else use the word selfish, it's basically saying, you're not doing what pleases me. It's the pot calling the kettle black. If you don't please me, you're being selfish. But the truth is, who's being selfish here?
Right.
If I want to be pleased all the time, it's the pot calling the kettle black. We don't have the right to expect to be pleased all the time. And you're exactly right. So if we keep that little adage clear in our head, that we better be careful when we point the finger at other people too, because then that means that 3 fingers are pointed back at ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think we have concluded this chapter and indeed completed this book. And I want to thank you for the journey that we've been on. It has been incredible. I feel like I have learned so much. I feel like it has changed me for the better, to understand the mistakes that we as humans make, but that there are answers, there are better ways to be with others and be with ourselves. So what a joy this has been. And I really hope that everybody, if you've listened to one podcast and say, well, that's all I needed in that, I really encourage you to go back and in your own time listen to all the recordings, because they are filled with good material.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me, to go back through this, even though I wrote the book several years ago. The truths are still there as I see them. And I think as we looked at the definitions and the meanings of these words and phrases, it really is for healthier and happier living.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.